No one at the Fairview self-storage auction expected the rust-colored door at the end of row D to roll up and reveal the ghost of a bank, yet that's exactly how it felt when the metal rattled skyward and the air that spilled out smelled faintly of old paper, cold steel, and the sour dust of secrets. For a heartbeat the crowd stilled, and even the seasoned bidders who came to flip furniture and gym equipment leaned forward, because in the half-light of that narrow unit sat a wall of dented safe. Deposit drawers bolted into a steel rack like a fossilized ribcage, a toppled vault cart with iron casters, and a banker's ledger cabinet banded shut with a cracked leather strap. And in that instant Harlan and Odette Whitlow, two retirees who had learned to stretch a pension the way sailors learn to read the wind, understood that this was either the worst mistake they could make with what remained of their savings or the last honest chance they would ever get to bend their luck back toward them. Harlan's life had been measured in practical work and steady hands. Decades in a machine shop where he learned to hear when metal wanted to warp and when it would hold if you treated it with patience. Odette's was a long ledger of underpaid hours in a school cafeteria and the quiet arithmetic of care, knowing which bill could wait a week, which car rattle meant danger, which neighbor would whisper about coupons if you asked kindly. Yet none of that thrift could outrun the unkindness of a bad investment pitch that had arrived wrapped in church-adjacent credibility, a conservative income vehicle that vacuumed out their cushion and left them paying interest for the privilege of being fooled. So when a friend at the senior center mentioned storage auctions with the shrug of someone who didn't believe in miracles but had seen a few, Harlan pretended to dismiss it even as he went home and watched videos and read the rules and learned why the veterans brought flashlights and why they never trusted mattresses or framed art that looked too eager to be seen. The morning of the sale was the kind of cold that makes cheap coffee taste noble, and the Whitlows held to the back of the knot of bidders with the posture of people who respect lines, listening as the auctioneer rattled through defaults and clean-out deposits and the 48 hours that begin the minute a gavel falls. Unit after unit coughed up the predictable remains of stalled lives: 2 particle board bedroom sets, a collapsed treadmill, boxes labeled holiday in a rushed hand, and Harlan kept his paddle down because restraint is a kind of courage. But when the manager's bolt cutters snapped the red seal on D19 and that grade rack of safe deposit drawers surfaced in the neon wash of the corridor light, something old and disciplined inside him clicked into focus, the way muscle memory can wake at the smell of cutting oil or the whine of a spindle, and he recognized the geometry of a system designed to survive heat, theft, and time. What struck Odette wasn't the steel, it was the order that clung to the mess, the way the drawers were tagged with brittle paper labels in the same dry handwriting, the way the toppled cart had been strapped for transport with a care that didn't match the chaos of a hurried move, and especially the banker's ledger cabinet with its index rods locked and a museum sticker half peeled from one side, a breadcrumb from a DX session long forgotten. She remembered the savings and loan collapse of the late 70s the way people remember storms by the smell before the sky breaks, and she knew a few facts that never leave you once you've sat through enough small-town bank meetings. Records last longer than reputations, keys go missing, and paper trails try to tell the truth even when people don't. The auctioneer, reading the room, started low because most buyers saw scrap weight and hauling fees. But when the first bid died on the vine and a few professionals drifted, Harlan lifted the paddle with a calm he didn't quite feel. Odette touched the edge of his sleeve as if to say, "Remember the number we promised?" And the rhythm turned quick. A counter from a man in a camo cap who liked metal by the pound, a pause, a second nod from Harlan that tasted like risk, the camo cap hesitating because steel is heavy and time is money, and then the soft clack of the gavel that sounds like finality to everyone except the person who just bought a problem that might be a door. They paid in cash because the rules said cash and because cash meant no one could say later that there had been confusion, and the manager handed over a brass key with the boredom of a clerk who has watched too many fortunes imagined and too many disappointments hauled to the dump. But he also could not resist adding that, back when this place had been a warehouse, the far bays had been leased by a private bank's off-site records arm, the kind that stored retired ledgers and emptied safe deposit frameworks when branches modernized, and that some of that old junk just never made it back to the main vault after the merger. A sentence that landed in Odette's chest like a bird deciding which way to turn before the first snow. They waited for the crowd to break because privacy is a currency in a parking lot full of strangers. Then they raised the door again and breathed in the old paper cool that lives in rooms designed to forget sunlight, and Harlan did what he had trained himself to do for 40 years. Mapped the space with his eyes, set a path so nothing toppled, and started 2 staging islands. One for obvious scrap, one for anything with ink, stamps, or numbers. Midway through that first hour, after photographing every drawer face and the cabinet's remaining labels the way a careful person photographs a fender before a rental, Odette found the first hinge in the story. A cloth bag wedged between the ledger cabinet and the steel rack, not hidden so much as braced against sliding, and inside it a scatter of bank keys on rings stamped with branch initials, some still tagged, some rubbed to anonymity by touch. Most were the ordinary skeleton of institutional life, but 2 were different, long-necked, heavy, machined from brass with a maker's mark that matched the older drawers, while along the bottom of the bag lay a wrapped packet of cards, the top one a brittle appointment reminder for Ms. Henley, Box 214, signature update, dated in 1978, which is not treasure and is not proof of anything except that names survive in corners where money often does not. If you enjoy slow burn finds where ordinary folks unravel the sort of mysteries that wealth tries to keep tidy, tap like and subscribe, and drop a quick comment with your state or country. We're building a little map of where these stories travel, and it genuinely helps more people discover them. By late afternoon they had not opened a single drawer because they could not. Without the internal pins or the right cores, the faces might as well have been bolted illusions, and Harlan would not put a pry bar to history the way a rookie puts a wrench to a rounded bolt, so they documented, labeled, and built a plan that respected both the law and the kind of ethics you can explain to a granddaughter. The ledger cabinet, once unstrapped, yielded only index rods and dividers but also a thin envelope stuck behind the lowest rail that held a photocopy of a branch closure memo for Fairview Trust and Loan, a name that had disappeared in a 1979 merger tsunami. The memo noting that selected artifacts, racks, signage, non-sensitive fixtures, transferred to warehouse per cost avoidance directive, a phrase so bloodless it felt like a confession. On the inside of the unit's corrugated wall someone had chalked E19 hold, and a date from 5 years ago, which matched the warehouse rumor and the sense that this had not been a move so much as a forgetting. They locked up at dusk because cold makes clumsy and clumsy breaks things. And on the drive home Odette counted backward through what they had seen and what they had not. No personal photo albums, no mattresses hiding mold and gilt, no framed prints screaming counterfeit, only systems and pieces of systems, which meant this was not a family's abandoned life but an institution's shed skin, and that difference carried a weight beyond resale value. At the kitchen table they did the unexciting work. That good luck requires scanning every scrap with their old flatbed, writing a numbered inventory by hand in a spiral notebook because paper survives power outages, and searching public records for Fairview Trust and Loan until they found the merger tree and the bankruptcy footnotes that read like a fossil record of financial weather. And in those notes Harlan saw the shape of something that could, if handled badly, draw attention they did not want, creditors who remember, law firms that never throw away a file, collectors who pretend to be historians until a drawer clicks open. They slept badly, which is to say lightly, waking at the small sounds of a familiar house and discovering that worry makes even the hum of a refrigerator sound like a question. In the morning Harlan called an old coworker who had become a locksmith, the kind who favors documentation over bravado, and asked in the abstract how one goes about lawfully opening retired safe deposit frames when one has purchased decommissioned fixtures at a lien sale, and the friend, after reminding him that no one opens anything without an owner's consent or a court, said that sometimes drawers still contain nothing but steel inserts, sometimes they hide a forgotten cuff link or an unimportant will copy, and once in a decade they contain something someone very much wants back, at which point you want receipts, photographs, counsel, and a plan that moves faster than gossip. Odette listened, poured coffee, and drew 3 boxes on the pad labeled document. Verify, decide, because order is a way to keep fear from becoming the loudest voice in the room. When they returned to 19 on day 2, the morning light cut a cleaner angle across the steel and made the chalk hold mark look fresher, as if the unit itself had been waiting for someone who would not treat it like salvage. And just inside the threshold, half under the rack, Odette noticed something she had missed. a brass nameplate that must have fallen from a drawer face, its tiny screws still clinging, engraved in that thin banker's font with a surname that felt like a pebble in the shoe of. Local history: Kendrick, one of the old manufacturer families whose donations still floated through the town's museum plaques, and the presence of that name, even as a tag, turned the unit from curiosity into responsibility. They laid the plate on a clean cloth, photographed it with a scale card, and Harlan finally said aloud what had been building since the gavel. This wasn't just a buy and flip. It was a story tied to people and paper and promises, and if there was any chance these fixtures or their contents, however thin, connected to estates still in probate or funds still in dispute, then the only way forward was sunlight, which is slower than hustle but kinder to the soul. They sealed the bag of keys, labeled the plate, and locked D19 with the steady motions of people who have decided not to be hurried by hope. In the parking lot, a reseller in a box truck asked if the steel rack was for sale and offered scrap rates with a grin that said he would double his money by nightfall, and Harlan smiled the way you smile at a man selling shortcuts and said they were still inventorying. Then he and Odette drove away with the sense that behind them lay not a jackpot but a hinge, and that how they opened it would determine whether the next chapter felt like a windfall or a storm. When Harlan and Odette returned home that evening, their modest kitchen felt different, almost ceremonial. The wrapped keys and brittle memos they had gathered now lay across the table under the yellow light of a single bulb. Harlan's hands, still steady from years of machining parts to thousandths of an inch, moved with the same patience he used to reserve for delicate work. He organized each key by length, metal type, and stamp, while Odette wrote down every word from the tags that hadn't yet faded. The air smelled faintly of brass and coffee, and for a few quiet minutes, they were simply two old craftsmen trying to make sense of another person's design. But sense refused to come easily. The documents didn't form a story yet, just fragments of one. There were branch memos, faded deposit slips, even a few envelopes marked confidential, do not destroy. Most of it seemed worthless, and yet none of it felt accidental. It was as if someone had packed these things in a rush, but not in panic. More like a person trying to bury something properly, hoping someone honest might find it someday. Odette couldn't shake that thought as she turned over the last envelope, the one that mentioned a Fairview Trust and Loan. The name tickled a memory. Her father had once banked there before it was absorbed by a larger chain in the late 70s. A small bank with old money, the kind that handled wills and discreet deposits for families with more pride than sense. The next morning, curiosity outpaced caution. They returned to the unit with gloves, notebooks, and the determination of people who had spent a lifetime following rules but were suddenly rewriting their own. The air inside was cool and thick, carrying that scent of dust and time that always hides in sealed places. Harlan began clearing a path along the left wall while Odette examined the steel drawers. Some were open and empty, others were sealed tight, their keyholes dull with corrosion. One rack near the back was tagged with a small paper slip reading, 19 hold, branch transfer. That phrase lingered in both their minds. Transfers meant paperwork, and paperwork meant trails. Someone, somewhere, had once signed for these things. Halfway through their sorting, Harlan noticed a shape half hidden beneath the ledger cabinet. A square parcel wrapped in brown paper and bound with old twine. He sliced the twine carefully and unfolded the paper to reveal what looked like a portable cash box. Inside was only a single sheet of paper, a transaction ledger for a Kendrick Family Holdings Trust. The ink had bled from moisture, but the header was still legible. The Kendricks had been one of those old manufacturing families that once built the town's reputation before vanishing quietly after the 1980s recession. The ledger didn't contain numbers, only notations. Transfer, lockbox 214, renewal pending, verified contents 476. Odette exhaled slowly, her instincts stirring. She'd worked at a school office for years. She knew the weight of records that outlived the people who made them. This isn't just clutter, she murmured. Someone took care to keep this organized. Harlan nodded but said nothing. He was staring at the pattern of dust on the floor, where faint drag marks suggested something large had been moved out not long before the sale. The unit had been forgotten, but not untouched. That evening, they went online to search for any trace of Fairview Trust and Loan. The search led them down digital hallways of archived newspapers and corporate merger documents. It turned out the bank had closed in 1979 after being absorbed into a chain that later collapsed in the savings and loan crisis. Lawsuits followed, assets were liquidated, and records disappeared into the bureaucratic fog. The pieces fit just loosely enough to suggest something large had once existed there, and that the unit they'd bought might be a fragment of that vanished world. If you enjoy stories where forgotten places hide real history, take a second to like this video, subscribe for the next part, and comment where you're watching from. It genuinely helps small creators like us keep sharing stories like this. Late that night, while Odette slept, Harlan sat by the kitchen window and turned one of the brass keys between his fingers. The moonlight caught its worn edges, and for a brief moment he thought he saw movement outside, just a car passing, headlights glancing across the street, but it was enough to send a shiver of unease through his chest. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe not. People talk in small towns, and word of a bank vault found in a storage locker would travel faster than truth. The next morning confirmed it. When they arrived back at the facility, the manager greeted them with a politeness that didn't reach his eyes. He asked too many casual questions. Had they found anything interesting? Were they planning to sell the metal racks? Did they need help hauling debris? It was the kind of friendliness that hid curiosity like a knife in a napkin. Harlan kept his answers short, thanked the man, and locked the door behind them. Only then did he notice that the dust at the entrance had fresh shoe prints, 2 pairs that weren't theirs. Odette saw it too. She pressed her lips together, saying nothing. Together they decided to finish the sorting quickly, document everything, and move the more valuable items home for safekeeping. Still, when she closed the notebook later that evening, she realized her handwriting had grown smaller, tighter. Curiosity had drawn them in, but now something colder had joined it. The quiet understanding that whatever lay locked behind those drawers might have belonged to someone who hadn't wanted it found. And yet, neither could stop. Harlan believed in patterns, in things made with purpose. Odette believed in order and closure. Between them, belief was stronger than fear. And deep down, they both knew that history, once disturbed, never goes back to sleep willingly. By the time the morning burned off the mist and left the street as clean and empty as new paper, the Penners had already decided that caution did not mean paralysis. It meant sequence, and sequence began with returning to the unit not to rummage, not to celebrate, but to audit. The corridor felt cooler than the day outside, a concrete lung that breathed dust and fluorescent hum, and when Alden rolled the door up only waist-high before stopping to look for small shifts, drag traces on the concrete, a hairline of scuffed powder near the threshold, a tape end that no longer lay perfectly flat, he saw just enough to confirm that memory had been right the previous afternoon. Something had been nudged and then made to look undisturbed, the way a book on a shelf will sit half. A finger forward after hands that do not belong to it have borrowed a sentence. He raised the door, clicked on a single clamp lamp, and let the light walk the room from left to right like a museum guard on rounds. Order still ruled, but it ruled with the brittle authority of a kingdom that has heard distant hoofbeats. They worked as if they had been trained to do this, which in a sense they had. Decades of careful living are a kind of apprenticeship for crisis, and so they built a staging island by the entrance, laid out soft towels, numbered index cards, a digital scale, and a cheap UV flashlight whose purplish beam had once found pet stains and now would scan watermarks and bank emulsions. From there Alden lifted one of the narrower steel drawers, the kind that had labels inserted beneath acrylic windows, and slid it onto the towels as if moving a patient from gurney to bed. Inside sat manila envelopes precisely aligned, each stamped in violet ink Fairview Trust and Loan, private custody, and beneath the stamp a typed line that sounded both official and evasive, storage transfer, Kendrick Family Holdings Trust, attention, custodian of records. He opened the first envelope only a thumb's width and saw that it held bearer certificates, old-world things that breathe a different law, coupon bonds whose clipped corners told a story of interest paid during years that were suddenly not so long ago. The second envelope contained deposit acknowledgments showing box numbers that matched the aluminum tags still clipped to 2 key fobs in the drawer. The third held a carbon copy of Temporary Relocation Manifest that explained, without ever truly explaining how safe custody contents could be boxed for security renovation and placed in off-site storage under chain of custody seals no longer present on the carton that now sat 3 feet from his knee. Marigold did not speak. She did what she always did when the ground moved. She wrote the shape of the movement so future selves would not mistrust what present selves had seen. She logged envelope counts, tag numbers, bond denominations, even the oxidation halo on each paperclip, because small, stupid details are the ones that keep predators from telling a cleaner story later. Then she shifted to the second drawer and found what looked at first like office detritus and then, on a slower pass, like the bones of a private archive. A contact sheet of black and white photos of numbered boxes on a bank vault table. A Polaroid of a notary seal beside a stack of slim ledgers. A stapled memo on letterhead that still had enough tooth to the fiber to feel expensive, in which a junior officer took the risk of writing a plain sentence. We cannot continue to warehouse custody assets without a written directive from the trustee, and under it a fountain pen annotation that had not been meant for anyone outside a small circle. Directive forthcoming. The family will keep this discreet. It should have been reassuring that the papers documented themselves. Instead, it made the room feel like a stage, the kind built to host a third act nobody wanted to watch. Halfway through the second hour, when the neatness of it all had begun to feel like a trap disguised as a compliment, Alden slid a thinner folio free from a sleeved binder and found inside a page with the kind of value that is hard to ensure. A typed index of Box 4B, Personal Valuables, Selected List. And beside each line a parenthetical hand in blue ink that had updated amounts or added notes. Waltham Pocket Watch. Presentation, 1919, Ihar. WCK, Patek Ref. 96 in steel, service 1974. Omega CK 2913, original bezel. There were other objects, medals, a signet, 2 small velvet pouches labeled simply loose stones. But the watches made a different kind of electricity run up his arms because lists like this mean someone once took custody seriously, and custody is a word that courts and thieves pronounce with equal appetite. He photographed each page against a scale card, then sealed the folio in a zip bag they had labeled at home, not because plastic makes paper safer but because the act of sealing and labeling turns panic into protocol. If you find yourself leaning in for the slow details, the little choices that keep ordinary people safe, tap like and subscribe, and drop a quick comment with the state or country you're watching from. It helps us keep telling careful, true-to-life stories to the folks who appreciate patience under pressure. The afternoon shifted around them in the small ways it does when the world outside a door does not know the weight being resorted on the other side. Golf cart brakes squeaked 2 aisles over, someone swore at a sofa that would not obey physics, and once, a detail both unimportant and unforgettable, a wasp traced the rectangle of light with a pilgrim's precision before deciding there was no nectar to be had in records. Alden moved to the back wall where a banker's box sat at a different angle than its neighbors and turned it to reveal a red wax mark half-smeared by some past thumb. Inside, wrapped in linen that had been folded and refolded until it learned its edges, lay 3 small steel tins with rotary dials the size of dimes, luggage locker safes from an era when hotel clerks wore waistcoats. He had no way to open them without violence and no appetite for adding new damages to old stories, so he logged them, weighed them, listened to each at his ear to hear whether the contents were a single heavy thing or many small ones, and returned them to the linen like a nurse repositioning a limb. In the same box, under the tins, was a flat parcel marked simply quiche letters, private. And he should have left it for later, but restraint is a muscle that sometimes fatigues. Inside were 8 envelopes addressed to the trust from a name they had begun to know too well, Marcus Ellery, Fairview Trust. And while the phrasing never quite committed a crime on paper, the rhythm of the paragraphs made a promise. As long as you do not ask the wrong questions, your wealth will remain the kind of wealth that is allowed to exist. They left nothing in the unit that could be carried out under a jacket. Even so, when they locked the door and walked the aisle with hands empty and faces neutral, Alden felt watched in the way you feel a low-grade fever before a thermometer agrees with you. The manager lifted 2 fingers from a clipboard as they passed the office, a gesture that might have been neighborly and might have been inventory, and back on the road a late-model sedan with rental stickers did a small, stupid thing that only registers as intent if you have lived long enough to catalog such things. It rolled ahead at an obedient speed until a light turned yellow, then eased through on the last legal breath to separate itself from them without ever looking like flight. He drove home by an inelegant route and parked under a maple that had not noticed human drama since the year it sprouted. Evening made the living room into a study again, and they did the work that keeps wolves from writing the history: duplication, dispersion, redundancy. Marigold scanned each key tag and envelope, typed page numbers into a spreadsheet that had begun as modest and was now a small city of cells. And then she did a thing that felt theatrical only because people forget how often theater is just survival. She wrote the name and phone number of a retired trust and estates attorney on a fresh index card, slid the card into a clean envelope with a note that read, "If anything happens to us, call this person and give them the thumb drive in the freezer," and addressed it to their daughter with a stamp but not a send. The point was not to frighten the child they still thought of as a child. The point was to give themselves a different lever than fear. Alden, meanwhile, laid out the watch list from the folio and cross-checked reference numbers against vintage catalog scans, and in less than an hour the page that had been speculative began to swagger with specificity. The Patek reference was, in fact, the simple Calatrava that scholars use to explain the word proportion. The Omega lineage read like a prologue to the Seamaster story, and the Waltham presentation made a small corner of American industry feel near enough to touch. What would have felt like fortune a week ago now felt like an exam they had not studied for but could not skip. They could imagine the next 3 weeks too easily. A recovery agent with a laminated card would appear. The words estate, creditor, misallocated, and amicable would be deployed with the confidence of a man who has learned to turn grammar into leverage. Whispers would suggest that the Penners were unsuited to hold such delicate matters, and a quiet, generous settlement would be offered in exchange for silence that would later be described as mutual respect. So they set out to alter the script by changing the venue of the performance. In the morning, before coffee, Alden sent a plain email, scans attached, no narrative, to a registrar at the State Museum whose reputation for dry integrity had made her a footnote in articles about other people's discoveries. An hour later a reply came back that sounded like oxygen. "We cannot tell you what to do, but we can advise on documentation and we can witness your chain of custody if you wish." That phrase, "witness your chain of custody," did not make the house safer, but it made their story harder to steal. Night folded the neighborhood into a set of slow sounds. Refrigerator cycles, a dog negotiating with the moon, tires on far pavement, and still neither of them slept, because the body does not respect schedules when the mind has been asked to stand watch. Around 2, a car paused at the end of their block just long enough to make the pause the event. At 3, a text arrived from a number that had never belonged to them and would never belong to anyone they loved. Be smart. People get hurt holding things that aren't theirs. The grammar was cowardly, no names, no claims, just a narrative suggestion, and that, more than the threat, told Alden what he needed to know. Whoever wanted the story to go a different way did not yet have the courage or the paperwork to force it. He did not reply, did not show Marigold the phone until morning, simply took a photo of the screen beside the day's newspaper and saved it to the folder marked timeline because one day someone would ask when the pressure had begun, and answers that can be seen are stronger than answers that must be believed. At dawn, they moved 3 things that mattered. The thumb drive in foil to the bank box whose number now lived in 2 places and 2 places only, a slim binder of bond coupons to a second location that would never again be named within earshot of a powered device, and their fear from the center of the table to the edge of the room where it could sit and watch them work. Only then did Alden allow himself to say a sentence that had been too heavy to carry inside his head alone. "We cannot keep this private much longer, but if we choose the light while standing on our own 2 feet, we may choose the kind of light." And though he did not intend the sound to carry, it filled the house in the way a hand on a shoulder fills the person under it, not with certainty, but with a place to stand. Outside, the first delivery truck of the day breathed past their curb. Inside, 2 ordinary people who had purchased a numbered door were readying themselves for the oldest contest in their town's quiet history. Who gets to tell the truth about what lies behind it? By the time dawn ripened into a gold-tinted morning, Alden and Marigold had already turned their home into something that no longer resembled a retirement cottage. The kitchen table, once a place for coffee, crosswords, and Sunday toast, had become a command center covered with folders, labeled envelopes, and a laptop glowing like a quiet sentry. Every movement had purpose now. Every sound was a note in a song neither of them had chosen to learn. The air smelled of printer ink and anxiety. Marigold, still in her robe, scrolled through digital archives of estate disputes while Alden wrote a letter by hand, something solid, unhackable, meant to be opened only if required. They had spent a lifetime trusting paper. Paper had rules. Paper didn't vanish when power flickered. Before noon, a knock came at the door. It wasn't violent, but it wasn't casual either, a measured rhythm that announced itself as official. Marigold froze mid-step, her hand tightening on a mug that instantly felt too fragile. Alden opened the curtain just enough to see a man standing on their porch in a pressed gray jacket, holding what looked like a clipboard. He had the practiced posture of someone who'd learned to look harmless in order to ask dangerous questions. "Good morning," the man said when Alden finally cracked the door open, his smile polite to the point of parody. "My name's Mr. Haverly. I represent a client with a potential interest in a storage property recently sold at auction. May I come in?" The phrasing wasn't new to Alden. Decades of blue-collar work had taught him how power wraps itself in manners. "We're not looking to sell anything," he said calmly, keeping the chain latched. Haverly's eyes flickered, not surprise, but calculation, and he nodded, still smiling. "Oh, I'm sure that's true," he replied softly. "Still, it might be wise to understand what you've come into possession of. My client is concerned that certain records may have been misplaced. We'd like to avoid any misunderstanding." Alden thanked him for his concern and shut the door gently, though the lock clicked like a gavel. Behind him, Marigold whispered, "What records?" He shook his head. "The kind people don't lose by accident." From the window, they watched Haverly linger by the curb, typing into his phone before sliding into a black sedan that idled for a moment, then rolled away with the silence of money well spent. That evening, as rain pressed thin lines down the glass, Marigold's nerves began to harden into strategy. She called the museum registrar who'd replied earlier in the week and explained, without specifics, that they might have materials tied to a defunct financial institution. The woman on the other end was cautious but curious. "Bring copies, not originals," she advised. "And document everything from here on out. The more transparent you are, the less vulnerable you'll be if anyone challenges ownership." It wasn't comfort, but it was direction, and direction had become oxygen. If you love stories where small-town lives twist into something much bigger, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you'd do if strangers started asking questions about your discovery. It really helps our little corner of storytellers grow. 2 days later, they made the quiet drive to the museum, the trunk of their car holding a single folder and a cautious hope. The archivist who met them, a tall woman with silver hair and the calm authority of someone who believed in documentation more than rumor, listened carefully as they recounted how they'd purchased the storage unit. When Alden showed her the copies of the ledgers and the list of watches, her expression changed subtly. "You understand," she said, "that some of these materials could technically still fall under the jurisdiction of unresolved estates." He nodded. "That's what worries us." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll contact a historian who's worked on Fairview Trust. If what you've found is legitimate, you'll want your own paper trail of how it came to you. That's your protection." She took digital scans of the documents, then returned the folder untouched. "Keep the originals somewhere only you can access. Don't bring them back here until I call you." By the time they left, the sun was falling, turning the windows of downtown buildings into slabs of molten glass. They stopped at a diner for coffee, speaking little but sharing the kind of silence that feels like a conversation too deep for words. Outside, headlights passed in steady rhythm, ordinary cars, ordinary people, but Alden's eyes followed each reflection as if measuring intent. "They're not done," he murmured. "Whoever's behind this, they're patient." Back home, Marigold opened her journal and began to write, not for evidence this time, but for sanity. She wrote about fear as something you learn to live beside, like a shadow that eventually gets tired of you. She wrote about how the discovery had changed their marriage, pulling them closer even as it pushed them toward uncertainty. She wrote about fairness, about how good people often find themselves in stories that began with someone else's greed. A week later, a letter arrived. The envelope bore no return address, only a single line typed neatly across the front, to the current holders of Fairview Trust materials. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper embossed with the seal of a law firm in Chicago. The language was immaculate, cold, flawless, and threaded with quiet menace. It stated that the estate of one Marcus Ellery was seeking the return of wrongfully transferred private assets. The letter requested contact to arrange restitution and warned that failure to comply may result in escalation. There was no phone number, only an email address. Alden folded the letter slowly, as if touch alone could decipher its truth. "So now it's official," he said. "The past has a lawyer." Marigold placed a hand over his. "Then we need allies who have sunlight on their side." They decided to act first. The next day, they met again with the museum registrar and showed her the letter. This time, she didn't just listen, she acted. "This crosses into legal intimidation," she said, calling a contact from the state archives. Within hours, the Penners were connected to a trust attorney who specialized in disputed inheritances. The advice was simple: make no contact with the sender. Preserve all correspondence. And understand that possession, properly documented, carries weight. The couple left the office lighter than they'd arrived, though unease still lingered in the corners of their minds. They had started this journey chasing curiosity, maybe a little luck. Now they were guardians of something that had slept too long under other people's silence. That night, Alden placed the original documents back into the lockbox beneath the floorboards, his movements slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "We've woken something that belonged to history," he said quietly. Marigold closed the lid, pressing her palm against the cold metal. "Then maybe," she said, "it's time history finally told the truth." Outside, the night was still, but somewhere beyond the trees, an engine turned over once and then died, a small, uncertain sound that lingered far too long to be forgotten. The following days stretched like long corridors of waiting. The Penners moved carefully, their lives reduced to deliberate steps between the kitchen table, the safe, and the front door. The museum registrar kept her promise and contacted the state attorney's office, which confirmed that Fairview Trust had indeed collapsed decades earlier after its chairman, Marcus Ellery, was convicted of financial misconduct and tax evasion. He died in prison 15 years ago. His estate had since fractured into a maze of unresolved ownership, dormant shell companies, and heirs who had long since abandoned the fight. The letter Alden had received was, at best, an opportunistic fabrication, at worst, a sign that someone still profited from Ellery's unfinished empire. For the first time in weeks, relief brushed the edges of their fear. It didn't erase it, but it made it breathable. The attorney handling their case advised them to bring the materials to a secure, neutral institution for formal verification. "If the items are genuine," he explained, "they belong not to an heir but to the record of the state. Transparency is your best shield." Alden nodded. He understood. Secrets had teeth, truth had witnesses. The next morning, as sunlight crawled across their modest yard, they packed the documents and smaller artifacts into sealed containers. Marigold labeled each one by hand, her cursive steady despite the weight of what she was letting go. "We're not losing it," she told herself quietly. "We're just giving it a safer home." The drive to the city was long and strangely peaceful. For once, no cars followed them, no glances lingered in mirrors. The world looked ordinary again. Gas stations, school buses, early shoppers. But ordinary now felt like a gift. At the State Archives building, the archivist greeted them with both gratitude and caution. She explained how the process would work. First, an official intake of the documents under a joint custody agreement, then a public record verifying that the Penners had lawfully discovered and surrendered historically significant materials. "You'll still have recognition," she said gently, "and protection. No one can claim you stole what you chose to share." When the last form was signed, Alden placed the sealed envelope of bearer bonds into a transparent evidence case. He felt its lightness in his hand. It weighed less than a pound, yet somehow represented generations of ambition, deceit, and neglect. Marigold watched as the clerk locked it away in a steel drawer. For the first time since opening that storage unit, she allowed herself a long exhale. The sound seemed to loosen the whole room. On the drive home, the quiet between them wasn't tense anymore. It was earned. "It's strange," she said, looking out the window. "We started this hoping to find something valuable, and we did, but not the kind we thought." Alden smiled faintly. "We found out what kind of people we are when no one's watching." When they returned, a small envelope was waiting in their mailbox. Inside was a typed note from the attorney. "The state recognizes your cooperation. A small compensation will be arranged for the authenticated items. Thank you for preserving a fragment of history." Tucked behind the note was a cashier's check, enough to pay off their debts, fix the roof, and leave a cushion of comfort they hadn't known in years. That night, the Penners sat on their porch under a slow, warm sky. The air smelled faintly of rain and lilac, the kind of scent that insists life keeps going no matter what stories it's forced to hold. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence between them had transformed from fear into peace. If you followed their journey this far, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It means the world to our storytelling family and helps us bring more true-to-life adventures your way. Weeks passed. News of their discovery spread quietly through local media. Small articles, a few interviews. Some called it luck, others integrity. The museum even displayed a few scanned pages of the Fairview Trust files with a simple plaque, donated by Alden and Marigold Penner, private citizens of Fairview County. Strangers recognized them at the grocery store. Neighbors who once barely waved now stopped to chat. Yet despite the sudden attention, the couple stayed humble. They had touched something ancient and corrupt, and instead of letting it define them, they'd handed it to history to decide its meaning. One evening, Alden opened the old storage key that he still kept on his nightstand. The metal was tarnished now, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. It reminded him that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right when fear is sitting beside you, whispering all the reasons to walk away. Marigold joined him at the window, their reflection ghosted in the glass. Outside, the street was calm, the world unchanged. "You think anyone else will ever find something like that again?" she asked softly. He smiled, slipping the key into her palm. "Maybe. But if they do, I hope they find the courage to tell the truth too." The clock ticked gently in the background, a rhythm of ordinary life restored. Their story, once tangled with shadows, had returned to the light, proof that sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't the ones you keep, but the ones you set free. And with that, the Penners finally turned off the last lamp, their house folding back into the quiet comfort of two souls who had faced the weight of history and chosen honesty over fear.